Brad's friend Marky died of cancer and Brad cried. Brad spent his life doing Zen, but he'd never told his friend anything about Zen. So then Brad wrote Marky a letter, and it made him feel a little bit better. Then Brad wrote some more, soon he had letters by the score. And these are his letters to a dead friend about Zen.
Maybe we should give the folks at home a little introduction to what you do, and I probably don't even know all of it myself.
Let them know who the hell I am, and why they should
care,
why they should spend 40 minutes with me.
Yeah.
So my name is Rylend Grant. I have, I guess, in terms of my entertainment industry cred, I have for at least a dozen years now. Though I feel like I've been saying a dozen years for like a few years, so it's probably longer.
For a dozen years,
might be 15 years. I have been a working screenwriter in Hollywood. I've developed film and television projects for J.J. Abrams and John Woo and Justin Lin and F. Gary Gray and Penelope Cruz and Fernando Trueba, and I can keep listing names and stuff like that. I mostly get paid to write kind of big poppy action movies. Writing a movie for Robert De Niro on Netflix right now, which has been kind of awesome and interesting.
Robert De Niro.
Yeah, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of swerved into the comic book lane also. Comic books were always kind of my first love, and it got a lot easier to do them a few years back, and so I just kind of started churning them out. So I did a book called Aberrant, which you can get on Amazon.com.
Good to get a plug in there,
which won a Ringo Award last year. It's kind of the Golden Globes of the comic book industry. Was nominated for a couple of others. I had a book, Banjax, last year, which is kind of a dark superhero noir that was on a bunch of 10 best lists, and I have about 4 other books in the pipe. So those are my entertainment industry credentials. I know you, because for, I don't know, 12 plus years now. Though I feel
dozen years.
I feel like I've been saying 12 plus years for a lot of years. So probably 15 plus years. I have been, and there was a big flirtation process before then, but I have, practiced one form of Buddhism or another, mostly Zen. That was what I gravitated towards. I was one of these guys that kind of, LA has this really rich, Buddhist community. And I've sat everywhere and with every teacher, in this place, and eventually found a home, with the
weirdos,
with your group years ago. I mean, God, I don't even know how long ago it was now. It feels like forever. And it was called Dogen Sangha Los Angeles back then. It is now the Angel City Zen Center. Sat with you for a long time, and eventually you put a robe on me.
We did that ordination. Don't ask me to ordain you.
Yeah, don't. It's not. Believe me.
Good.
It's I'm with Brad on that one. And then eventually helped raise the money that got the
whole
ACZC up and running, and I've been a little out of practice lately because of I had a kid. I have a 3-year-old that I'm still wrestling with, and my career stuff got really crazy. So I think that this is my topic. I think you called the right guy. If you're going to call me for something, this is.
So I'm kind of interested. We exchanged a few emails before this, and talking about what it means to be sort of in the entertainment industry and doing Zen practice. And I don't know, we could go in this direction because I kind of was interested. You were mentioning Thich Nhat Hanh's admonitions against people like you, who people like me too, because I was working for Tsuburaya, which made these punch 'em up movies with monsters and stuff and explosions and all that for kids. Even worse,
poisoning minds.
I'm probably worse than you because I was poisoning children instead of just adults.
When you started talking about this intersection of Zen and the entertainment business, my mind immediately went to a specific place. I mean, we could probably talk for 2 days about this, and I do want to at some point get to the whole the Zen liberty aspect
Yeah,
of
yeah,
because I think that that's very rich and something that I've been dealing with recently. But where my mind immediately went is this kind of is this notion of responsibility, quote unquote.
Yeah, because what did Thich Nhat Hanh actually say? I'm looking at the letter that you printed out here. But because I have Thich Nhat Hanh sort of came along a little late for me.
Yeah.
So like I had already read all the sort of pop Zen books I needed to read before I was even aware of Thich Nhat Hanh. So honestly, I only know his work when other people tell me.
Yeah.
But he did say some specific stuff about movies and
Yeah, and so this is kind of a personal journey. So let me just frame it a little bit.
Okay.
So again, like I said, I was this Buddhist nomad for a long time and bounced from group to group. But my very first group, almost my first teacher, was Thich Nhat Hanh. My first group was a Thich Nhat Hanh based group, and I've sat in a couple of them for a little over the years, and it's a little flowery message for me. I take to a lot of it.
Yeah.
But when I found your group, it was really based in realism and it wasn't about this kind of flowery notion of things. But he's also a hard liner in a lot of ways, and so I'll sort of get into that. And so I mean the other part of my journey I think that is important is, I mean, you know better than anybody how important the precepts have been to me. So I think everybody who comes into Zen practice really kind of they latch onto a few notions and something kind of becomes their guiding light. And for me it was always the precepts. And so when you finally put a robe on me, and the reason you put a robe on me was you travel so much.
Yeah.
You needed some people who were slightly more experienced than the rest of the crew to kind of lead classes in your stead. And so you're like, hey, I'm going out of town. You, John, and Nina have to lead classes for a month.
Yeah.
Figure out something to talk about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, what do I talk about? And so, okay, I'm going to really delve into these precepts. And so since then, I mean, a lot of my talks have to do with the precepts, and I've actually led 3 like 10 class full-on series on the precepts and prep people for Jukai and all of that stuff. And I even talked to you about writing a book about the precepts at some point. And it was the whole thing was gonna be a letter to my 3-year-old daughter.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah. That was so when you started talking about the Letters to a Dead Friend book, I was like really excited. The first time I took the precepts was with the Thich Nhat Hanh group, and they get really hard line about them. It is very easy to kind of like to read a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh, to kind of bathe in his version of the precepts and come away like really questioning everything, because that 5th precept, the precept on intoxicants, and I wrote a version of it that I think is a disciple of the Buddha does not intoxicate self or others, but rather cultivates and encourages clarity. And so a couple of things to unpack, and as far as like the Thich Nhat Hanh goes with these precepts, is that like he was big on the idea that movies, TV, magazines, news reports, like everything we consume is a potential intoxicant, right?
And there are people who go that direction with it. Yeah, who I mean, even classically in older Buddhist writings, people will go that way with it.
Yeah, and so anything that we're putting eyes and ears on is a potential intoxicant, and so like we have to be, this practice is about being uber careful what you consume, what you even look at. You know what I'm saying? That's what it sounds like sometimes. And so, I have sat with him in person several times, and he will hammer this point, and it can be, it can feel like he is equating watching Die Hard with like chugging a 5th of vodka and getting in your car. You know what I'm saying? And so the other thing that's important to unpack about this is that the precept specifically says do not intoxicate self or in all caps others, right? And so you make your living writing books. I write my living writing comic books, writing action movies, and so it was easy for me to go to a retreat at Deer Park, listen to a couple of days of talks, and then kind of come away feeling like I was a drug dealer.
Like you shouldn't even be doing what you're doing.
And so I had an existential crisis, and also it's like the film business is hard and it sucks, and like it's not fun a lot, right? And so you always end up at these crossroads in your life and your career, and that's what you're talking about in your letter is like, okay, well, I have this opportunity to make a bunch of money. Should I be doing that or should I be doing this? And
sometimes I wonder if I made the right. I had this big discussion with Piruz yesterday about did I make the right decision? When I said no to Tsuburaya and their money and everything.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, now I've got all this.
Yeah, now you got all this. this kingdom. But I mean, you and I are, and almost everybody that I encounter on a daily basis in the film entertainment industry, these are really smart people, and they could have done almost anything in their lives. Like, I know guys that they got perfect SAT scores, and they went to Harvard, and they could be titans of industry, and they chose to write movies instead. And it is an everyday kick in the teeth, and it is kind of the one business where, like, almost any other business, you get what you put in. If you work hard, you can.
I think I know where you might be going, because you can write something and then you've poured your whole heart in it and nobody wants it.
You can write the greatest script that's ever been written and nobody gives a damn because you don't have the right element, or you don't have the right it's not the right time. It's not the right. People are lazy. So it is rough to deal with, and we can talk about the role of Zen in dealing with all that, because it sucks. But back to the point is, like, so I would have these periods of existential crisis like every couple of years, and so when these two things kind of smash together, it's like, okay, well, I there's part of me that kind of wants to leave anyway, but now I have this guy who I really respect telling me that I might be like, this might be I might be slinging crack here. You know what I'm saying? I am polluting minds, and so what is my responsibility? And so a lot of my I sat with a lot of teachers, and so a lot of my, like, questioning of teachers and you and I dealt with this a lot, and Doka-san and things like that, is what is my responsibility here? Am I poisoning minds? Am I and the thing that always came back, and and I think of talks with I feel weird bringing up Noah Levine, but I spent a lot of years with Noah Levine, and he had some insight on this. Well, you know what I'm saying, and let's separate the message from the man there, because I could talk a lot about the man, and I don't want to be associated there, but also Reverend Daigaku over at Zen Suji, who I spent a lot of times with, and a lot of folks at ZCLA, but specifically with you, we sat down and kind of talked through a lot of this. And the thing that always came back, and the thing that came back from you, was like, look, somebody is going to write action movies, right? And 99 out of 100 people who are going to write them will not be asking these questions. Yeah,
and I think that's important. And I probably I'm sure I told you the story, but the folks at home don't know this. But I was working for Tsuburaya Productions for most of the time that I was for all of the time I was studying with Nishijima Roshi. And there were a couple incidents around that. One time I was carrying a book, an Ultraman book, with me and reading it on the train on the way to a retreat. And he looked at it and he said something about, those books teach children to worship power. Something like that. And I was like, oh God, I'm working for a company that teaches children to worship power. And then, I don't know, a few years later, I had this conversation with him when I was thinking about kind of almost the same sort of crisis you're describing. I was thinking about quitting Tsuburaya Productions and maybe, having him work it out so I could go to Eiheiji or some big, to really get deep into the Zen thing. And he told me to keep working for Tsuburaya Productions, that it would be a better thing for me to keep working for them than to go off to Eiheiji and be a monk, which surprised the hell out of me because I didn't expect that answer.
It's like you're more of service where you are than if you got swallowed up by the Zen Death Star.
I think so.
Became a stormtrooper in the Imperial.
He wasn't very fond of the whole Zen institution thing in Japan anyway. But I think it also had a lot to do with, what good I could be in a, almost what you're saying. If somebody's going to write Ultraman and somebody's going to work on that stuff, and if I'm in there, then that moves it in a certain direction that it wouldn't go otherwise. Same thing, he encouraged me to write for Suicide Girls for the same reason, which I was surprised by too. So
I think that that's exactly where I was headed with it, where it's like, almost all media we see does teach children to worship power and does glorify violence and does degrade women and you know what I'm saying? So it's like, but I mean, I think you and I mean, I'm sitting in your room here, and it's DVDs and books, and
Yeah.
no, but you and I grew up the same way. The television raised me, right?
Yeah,
I didn't have good role models, and so I learned right and wrong from Captain Picard. And
Well, he's a good role model, probably.
yeah.
I mean, he's fictional, but
no, and I exactly, and so I felt that responsibility. I mean, I felt the responsibility to the kid who like didn't have who was in the position I was, who didn't have a good leg up, and so yeah, you can. I mean, I think we have a responsibility to do that, to talk to those people. So it's like yeah, it's almost like we're undercover agents. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
We're kind of
yeah.
going into and sort of just trying to push the needle, because I mean that is the thing. It's like there were things that moved us. There were episodes of Star Trek that were talking about big existential
Yeah,
ideas
yeah.
and ideas of religion and communication and getting along. And they were great sci-fi is like it's a roadmap for what we could be, right?
yeah.
And I think it's the same thing inside us that drew us to that is
Yeah.
what drew us to this practice.
Yeah, and I was surprised when I started working for Tsuburaya Productions to find out how much thought went into an episode of Ultraman. You know, when I started submitting my scripts to them, and they're going, they're actually talking deeply about this stuff. So, it's not like it's completely absent there. But often it gets chewed up, and I was part of the letter that I didn't read was, the unsavory elements of the entertainment business that you have to deal with, and that used to really bug me. Even like I mentioned in the email, somebody told me at Tsuburaya Productions that they'd heard of people in Asia who were getting murdered over the rights to not necessarily Tsuburaya stuff, but entertainment properties, and how really vicious it gets there. But even when it's not getting to that level, it's all about greed and what sells and the flashiest thing. And I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting off.
No, you're not getting off target. So again, this is the it is a like day by day, moment by moment like situation navigating this sort of responsibility question that I was talking about. I mean, I write mostly action movies, write a lot of crime stuff, and so and I'm not the guy that just like reads a Wikipedia article and then tries to recreate a world. I go into the world and
I've done some of that myself too, and that can be weird.
Well, and it's particularly weird when you're writing about like Russian and Armenian mobsters, and we spent months like hanging out with Russian contraband dealers and Armenian bookies.
Oh my God, you really went into that.
And sitting down with these guys, and so it's like you're okay. Oh, that guy in the corner's getting beaten up, and it's like okay, well, what is like, how did I it is very stuff like that triggers an existential crisis. Like, how the fuck did I?
And then that's I was going to give you my example, which is not nearly as bad as I tried to write a novel once with Hitler as a character.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And I wanted Hitler to confront a Holocaust-denying sort of modern neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
So, and this was just on the internet, and I started reading all this stuff that they put out, and I'm going, really twisting my mind, because you're going, well, maybe they're right. No, I'm not really. But you're like, because what's interesting to me, and one of the weird lessons I learned from Zen is you can make. This is something that occurred to me during a retreat once, that I saw how my mind could justify anything. Absolutely anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a chain of logic that'll make, insert whatever the most horrible crime you can think of sound like a reasonable thing to do. And the power of that was, at the time, I mean, I don't know if talking about it makes it sound like anything, but I was just like, I'm just sitting there meditating in this temple in Japan, and all this is going through my mind and going, oh my God. And then when I was writing that novel, I got into it again. I was like going, oh my God, there's that chain of logic where you can go, oh, well, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, well, you're making a good point. It's like we're all kind of we are all kind of windsocks, right?
Yeah.
And we're right in the middle of a intense political period now, an election coming up and all that stuff, and it's very easy to, you listen to one guy and it's like, oh wow, yeah, he's right, he's making good points. You listen to the next guy, oh wait,
he's
no,
making
he's
the opposite point,
he's making the opposite point, but he's making it really well. We are just windsocks, and so when we get into this responsibility question, it's like, okay, well, well, there is so much of that going on. These people are just kind of blown with the wind, and you have these huge forces who are kind of blowing people this way, and they're blowing people in bad directions. And so, what I was always hearing from teachers and hearing from you and from the stories you told about Nishijima is that you are in a unique place to kind of, blow that windsock in a direction that we can't normally blow that windsock in, and so you should stay right there. And you are our person on. You're maybe not, you're not on the front line, but you're. And this is a weird analogy, but you're the sniper up in the. You're the guy who went behind enemy lines, and you're doing this. I don't know why I'm making war analogies right now.
But you can kind of move it in a little direction. One of the things Nishijima Roshi told me during that talk was like, you can make a little difference. Yeah. And I still remember that quote because I was like, oh, okay, I can make a little difference. Yeah. But that's better than making no difference at all. So, it's an interesting position because, if you're not in there.
Well, and it's easy to convince ourselves, right, that we have to move the conversation a mile, right? And there are plenty of times where the conversation does get moved a mile, particularly in the information age. However, kind of like football, what we're talking about is a game of inches, right? And it's move an inch, back an inch, move an inch, back an inch. That is the battle that we're fighting. And if enough of us can kind of get in the right place to move the conversation an inch, then over time we've moved it a mile together. And I think that's what all these people are talking about. And it's an interesting transition into your kind of Zen Liberty question, because I think that it becomes it's interesting that I'm sitting here because I have for years tried to push you in the direction of doubling down on that,
of being more of a celebrity,
of embracing it more, of putting more butts in seats, of doing more podcasts, of doing more events, all of that stuff. And you have, to your credit, always pushed back. You've always been skeptical or careful at the very least. Not to say that you've just put a wall up, but
but there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, a lot of it's personal. A lot of it's. I mean, there's a certain sort of like trying to be a good person reason about it, but it's also knowing where it could go for me personally, because I could see, if I'm out on tour, I could do these European jaunts every year. And I go over there and I'm a famous guy, to crowds of 40 to 45 people sometimes, not big crowds.
Literally dozens.
Literally dozens of people think I'm a celebrity. And even though it's I can kind of extrapolate from what I experience on the micro level to what it must be like, on the bigger level, and I'm going, I don't want to go there because there's all sorts of weirdness.
Look what it did to Noah, right?
He's a perfect example. I don't want to disparage the guy, but
and the crowd should know. So I was for years the president of the board of Dogen Sangha Los Angeles, and during a time of a lot of growth, what took us from 3 people sitting in a room to now there's a Zen Center and a podcast.
Almost 12 people sitting in
a room. We can talk about that, but years of retreats and all of that stuff. There was a lot of organizational change happening, is my point. And my job as the president of a nonprofit was to be, okay, well, how do we grow this? How do we? And your job as a Zen teacher was to, there is a moral, ethical. We can keep adding modifiers, but an agenda that needs to be right and true, and more important, in keeping with what you believe in, what is important to you, all of those things. And so a lot of our relationship for years was kind of negotiating those waters, right?
And I think that's important because there's a certain, I think right from the beginning of Buddhism, there's always been a certain amount of celebrity stuff. The Buddha himself was a famous guy in his time. Dogen probably. Well, Dogen was famous enough, and some of these people were really well known in their day, and so there was that sort of public thing you've got to negotiate, and it's always been there. But these days, it gets even weirder because you can address so many more people.
Yeah.
Like even this thing we're doing now, who knows how many people are going to see it? And
yeah, and that's that, and that was the point. That was what got us here, was back to the windsock analogy.
Yeah.
Is that why the Zen Liberty thing, this thing we're talking about, is so important, is because you have put yourself in a place, and you will put yourself in a place more and more over the years, and it's why you have to embrace it, and why a smart guy like Nishijima, who sees all the angles, or most of the angles, or more of the angles than we see, can say, yeah, do that, and not this. Because you could go to Eheiji, and you spend time in a monastery, and you never see the light of day.
Probably and like a little mushroom in there.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can get up, on a YouTube video, on a podcast, and, talk to, who knows, like, it may be a dozen people that hear this, it may be 1 million people that hear this for whatever reason down the line. You put yourself in a place to move that windsock more efficiently. Rather than inches, maybe you're moving it a foot.
Yeah.
Maybe you get into a place where you're moving it a half a mile. Maybe then you're moving it a mile or 10 miles. It's I think that is important, and there's so many. We're in the information age. People are overloaded with information, and so much of it is garbage and poisonous and awful that as many of us as possible need to kick our way into a place where we can be heard, and where I'm not saying my message is the right message. I know that what I'm saying is less poisonous than what, I don't want to make a political analogy here, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah,
insert asshole here.
Yeah, we could get into that. I started thinking about that as you were talking, the politics of the whole thing, because there's a certain. I had a teacher in America for about 10 years, Tim, and then I went to Japan, and I was kind of out of the loop of what was going on in America. And during the time I was in Japan was the time that Buddhism started to become big. I left in 93, and you could hardly find any Buddhism anywhere in America.
Yeah.
It existed, but I came back in 2004, 11 years later, and it's this huge thing. It's everywhere, and there's money to be made, and there's fame to be gotten. And I started looking at what American Buddhism had become, and I was sort of appalled by it, especially, God, I don't know if we should even go there, but especially the political aspects of it. It become very fused with this sort of very particular kind of left-wing politics, and not to, and if I even criticize left-wing politics, people think I'm a rabid, Trump-supporting right-winger, which I'm not. But I find I don't politically align with a lot of the, Buddhism in America these days.
Yeah, it became weaponized, right? You and I have talked about this a lot, where it just, over the history of Buddhism, like it starts in one place, it moves into another, it marries with the culture of the time and the place, right? And we saw that in Japan, and we saw that in Korea, and coming over from India in through Asia, and then it comes over here, right? And it marries with the hippie culture.
Yeah, it's because
the psychological the psychological movement and all that stuff, and then their politics become the politics of Buddhism in America, and not everybody feels that way.
Yeah,
right?
and I think what a lot of people in the U.S. don't know is how, if the times that Buddhism is political in Japan, probably throughout most of Asia, it tends to be very conservative.
Yeah.
Rather, it's only the United States and possibly Europe where it's all this sort of left-wingy Buddhism. I don't think that even exists in Japan. I'd be hard-pressed to think of an example of that.
Yeah. No, and I feel like people often understand your problem with that. Again, like, you hit it right on the head, where it's like people are like, oh, well, Brad's right-wing, or Brad, but it's like, your problem with it is the weaponization of Buddhism, and this idea that, well, if you don't believe exactly what I believe from a political, social standpoint, then you're not Buddhist. You can't be. You can't be. It is this thing that we, the idea of self, no self. It's that we draw this box around this imaginary, around these things. These 5 things are me.
Yeah,
And we are supposed to be eradicating that. The entire practice is eradicating that, letting go of it, letting go of these ideas that that bind us to that sort of thinking. But then the whole machine seems to be like, these 5 things are Buddhism. These 5 things are Zen in America. If you don't do this, and if you're not out trying to preach this stuff and trying to change people's minds, then you're not worth a damn. And all you've really said is like, well, that's not what this is about. And they're like, Trumper.
And I don't know where that comes from, but the other thing, the other sort of commonality that you and I both have is that we're Midwesterners living in California, which is also kind of exacerbates all of that. I'm from Akron. You grew up in Detroit. Yeah. So, they're pretty similar cities in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that sort of Rust Belt mentality butting up against this West Coast mentality, and then the Buddhism sort of comes up in that too. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just think that's sort of interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, coming from where we come from, it's like the ideas that people in Detroit have about Buddhism and what we do. Particularly when they, particularly it's like when you ordained me, it was like the first thing that happened was somebody that was there took a bunch of pictures. And I was thankful that we got pictures of it because it was an important event in my life. But then the first thing she did, she put them on Facebook. And it's not to say that I wouldn't have done it eventually, and I've since
sort
shared
of outs you.
I've since shared them because I kind of think it's funny, and it is weird to look back all those years ago and see you shaving my head, and my friends are there, and it was a good moment, and it marked like a big change in my life in a lot of ways. But yeah, so it was kind of outed, and then so when people back in Detroit that I went to high school with who are driving a fucking tow truck 3 miles away from where they were born. And
I know those kind of people.
They see us in our funny robes and doing all kinds of bows, and this freak shaving his head, and what the hell's going on?
It looks like you've gone completely. I go back to Akron just about once or twice a year and play shows with Zero Defects, and I'm just like, oh. Here I am back again. I tried to live I tried to live back in Akron, and I lasted a year and a half. I thought I'll be great. I'll go back there. It's cheap.
Yeah.
I can live on my what I make on this easily. But I was just I can't deal with it anymore. Yeah, I felt bad. I couldn't deal with it.
Well, it is so hard to return. It's like I felt like when I was and part of it because I was young. But when I lived in Detroit, my world was this big.
Yeah.
And then I went to the University of Michigan, which is one of the more liberal institutions in the world. And, it's kind of Berkeley East. And then my world got
Is that Ann Arbor?
Ann Arbor, yeah. And then my world got this big. And then I moved out to LA and my world got this big. And then I went overseas and my world got this big. And, but a lot of the people that I came up with, they're in their 60s and their world is still this big. And so you try to go back there, and you do have these fond memories, and there are amazing things about it, and it's this big part of you. But you go there, and it's like eventually a fish outgrows its tank, right? And if a fish is in too small a tank, it will die. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's worth talking about, and that this all leads into, is that in terms of the responsibility, and in terms of this stuff, kind of, being in a position to blow the windsock, right? So started doing these comic books a few years ago,
right? And
Zen has always, it's always kind of wormed its way into what I would write. It's like the philosophy is there, and the ideas are there, and the characters. I mean, I feel a responsibility in terms of how the characters act, and the sort of idea of karma that you kind of, whatever you put out comes back to you, and that sort of thing.
That's an interesting thing to put in an action film.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to do it subtly. You don't want to hit it right on the head. Sometimes I do hit it right on the head. But the interesting twist ends up being, you and I collaborated on a comic book.
We put Dogen in it.
that is being it is almost finished.
Oh, good.
The final issue it's a 4-issue arc. The first story arc, at least, is being drawn now, and it is about to catch on with the publisher. We can talk more about that off air. But so exciting times. But so first of all, it's a tokusatsu joint, which is awesome. It's it's about a team of guys in like armored tanks and airplanes that get together and beat back monsters. But it's
one of my favorite things.
Yeah, it's a time travel story. I mean, it was it's why it is kind of it's kind of like Voltron meets Fast and the Furious almost, but with a heart and a soul. And we are essentially, this is maybe a little much, but we were kind of teaching Buddhism with it. At the very least, it has become this ground, upon which we are exploring these larger existential ideas, but kind of through a Zen lens, like, ideas of time and space and how we perceive reality, ideas of responsibility, like we're talking about, right? How you treat others, how, in a way, I am no different from you. The whole, waves in a vast ocean, the ideas of the universe, all of it. This is a, you can read it and it's like, oh yeah, this is Voltron meets Fast and the Furious. It is a, I get paid to write big poppy Hollywood action movies, and so in a way it feels like a big poppy Hollywood action movie, but also in a way it feels like you're reading I don't know, hardcore Zen.
There's a little bit, I like it. I like what you've been able to do and what I've been able to contribute. But it's in, but you never know. I was just, as you're talking about this, thinking how before I ever met Tim or anything, I used to watch Kung Fu with David Carradine. The old movie. The kids out there aren't gonna even remember that one. But even though if I look at it now, some of the Zen in that was trashy. It was just fortune cookie Zen, but it was influential. It kind of made me go, I want to know more about this stuff. Even though the writers didn't seem to know, in retrospect, didn't seem to know very much about it, but it's interesting how you can worm a little. And Philip K. Dick, we've talked about his writings. He didn't know much about Zen, but he read a few D.T. Suzuki books and stuck stuff in his books about it, and I read those when I was 14 years old.
Well, and it's about when you read them, right? Because I even if they don't, Philip K. Dick was a very smart person, and he was interested in a lot of things, and he was curious, and he asked a lot of questions, and so he found a quote, a Zen, he found some Zen idea that was interesting to him, and he couldn't explain it like you can explain it to a crowd, but he was a smart guy, and he said, there's something here. And so what you saw in a book was him getting the quote on a page and starting to explore it, starting to knock it around, starting to ask questions about it, right? And at 14, you saw the quote, had the same reaction, had similar questions, and then had questions of your own. And that eventually, one thing leads to another. The dominoes fall. You end up here talking about Zen to a huge group of people. And it was the same thing with me. It's like, go back to Star Trek: The Next Generation. Just some of the things you run into. Yesterday's Enterprise.
Which one was that? You'll have to refresh. I don't usually remember the titles.
It's where the Enterprise C ends up kind of coming out of a break in space time.
Is that the one where at the end there's like a million Enterprises? Or are we?
Yeah. There is that sequence, but it's like, so the Enterprise C comes out and it changes the timeline drastically. And basically way back when the Enterprise C was destroyed, saving a Klingon outpost. That led to the Klingons. The Klingon Federation Treaty, which led to Years of Peace, which led to the timeline that we all know and love. However, the Enterprise C ends up coming through a rip in space-time. It ends up in the 24th century, and time changes. They never died saving the Klingon. They never died defending the Klingon outpost. It looked like they cut and ran. No treaty. Years of war. The Federation's losing.
Now I remember.
And so really big ideas about and again, me seeing that when I was 12 years old, led to an entire writing career. It's like, oh my God, these huge questions I don't understand it when I'm 10, but there is a world that is bigger and badder and more interesting, and there are these huge universal questions that we need to wrestle with in our lifetimes, and sometimes you do it in a quiet room staring at a wall, and sometimes you do it on a podcast, and sometimes you do it in a comic book.
It's really interesting how that happens, and it's good that there are people kind of at least trying to put that stuff out there to an audience, and who knows where it's going to go. That's why it's the same thing. I was thinking the same advice I give to people who are, I occasionally run into military people who are kind of conflicted about they're interested in Buddhism or something, but they're also a Marine or and I'll say I would rather have somebody in the Marines who thinks about these questions than have nobody in the Marines who thinks about these questions. So I usually encourage them, like, yeah, I think you should keep up with it if that's where your calling is, because somebody's got to do. The
world needs Marines.
Somebody's got to do that job. It's unfortunate. I remember one time hearing somebody in Santa Monica was on a podium saying, we wish you'd get rid of the military. I'm going, oh Christ,
Yeah.
I'm going, no, you can't get rid of the military, because then all the worst people, come and take over everything, and so you can't be too much of an idealist. You have to kind of look at the world as it is and say, well, this is the stuff we've got to deal with. Here's the cast of characters we've got.
Yeah.
You can say, I wish everybody was a different.
Hey guys, let's all get along, okay?
Yeah.
Let's just okay.
Yeah, and somebody goes,
you stay over there and I'll stay over there, okay? Is that good? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the it's the thing that always we talk about this kind of push and pull and this like weird weaponized version of like Zen and Buddhism that we're seeing, and the hippies kind of running roughshod over this thing, and I think that becomes my main issue with it is like, look, I don't care what you believe, but the moment you say that I have to believe what you believe, or that it matters if I believe what you believe, and all that stuff, that's where you get dicey.
Well, that's a thing in itself, that you have to believe what I believe.
Yeah.
Whatever is behind it,
Yeah.
that in itself, you have to believe what I have to believe, is the wrong way to go.
Yeah. And the idea that there's a right answer is flawed right off the bat, and they just make things way too simple. I mean, this, what you find out, we are trained that things are black and white our whole lives.
Yeah.
And the one thing Zen practice can and will do for you, if you commit to it, is you will realize that the world is always an ugly shade of gray. Nothing is black and white. Things are so much more complicated than look, if we stop, right now I assume something simple. If I stop and look at it, I realize it's crazy complex. But if you practice for 10 years, there are all these other layers. If you practice for 20 years, more layers. And life, existence, everything is so much more complex than we can even ever comprehend. And you get brief glimpses into it over the course of a practice, right? But so that becomes my problem, is I feel like that is, if I've experienced anything close to insight or a shred of enlightenment, is that I don't know anything, is that things are so much more complex and crazy than I can understand. And so my problem with what we're talking about is that they try to make things so simple. Oh, well, yeah, why don't we just get rid of the military? It's like, if it were that simple, that would be amazing. Sign me up if it could be that simple. However,
Yeah, I was just...
the world will end.
Yeah. This article, it actually came out several months ago, but somebody's been sharing it on Facebook recently. And it's this woman who's a very lefty, liberal, a Buddhist academic, talking about how we need to make Buddhism more available to, people of color and people of different classes and, and all these things. And I'm going, it's real pie in the sky stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't... And so after reading that and reading some of the comments people were making and all this, I'm sitting in the car with Adriana, who, as you know, but maybe the folks at home don't know, she's my girlfriend and she's Latina. Both of her parents are Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been together for about 6 years now. And so I know a lot of her extended family, because Mexican families are it's exactly the stereotype you think. They always get together and hang out with each other and have these... Anyway, So I was saying to her, what do you think it would take to get, your cousins and your aunts and uncles to come to a Zen center? And she just laughed.
Yeah.
That was that, her whole response was just like, she just laughed.
Yeah.
It's not as, you can go, oh, we should make it available, but it's, there's so many things that have to happen before.
My comment is, we're here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, the whole point of this thing, we don't recruit, we don't proselytize, we don't try to convert people. We're here. And my problem with, I mean, I think everybody should be doing this because it's helped me.
I would love to see the most diverse group in the world come to a Zen center. But my bottom line is I'm just happy that somebody shows up.
Yeah.
I don't have time to think about the demographics.
Yeah, I mean, my problem with that is, it doesn't involve race or creed or any of that stuff. My problem is like, well, that assumes that we have the right answer.
Yeah, that too.
And in my experience, and again, I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of my, Latino friends, particularly Mexicans, have very rich spiritual lives that work for them. And if they were missing something, they'd probably be out looking for it. And so what is to say that our Zen Buddhism is more valuable than their Catholicism that they grew up with?
Why try to sort of replace what they've already got?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Maybe we can stop there because we went longer than the time I had said.
48 minutes.
So
tick tick tick.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, it was good. Have me back sometime. I'll rant about something else.
We could probably maybe we should make this whole series, but that's good enough for now.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Good to meet you.